Thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Better Content Made Easy, where we will introduce you to the Accessibility Inspector in Office. What if I told you there was a way to make your documents, presentations, and spreadsheets more professional, improve your efficiency in Blackboard, make the world a better place for all, and that was easy? Sounds pretty amazing, right? Today we're going to introduce you to the Accessibility Inspector in Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. The Accessibility Inspector identifies possible improvements you can make to the accessibility of your document. It runs whilst you're working, and it will show you how to make your document more accessible. Now, accessibility is about removing barriers that might prevent colleagues, students, or the general public from getting the most out of our resources, particularly if they have an impairment or disability. Accessible content is just better content. If you use Blackboard, you've probably used to seeing these accessibility indicators. These give you instant feedback on the accessibility of the content that you upload for your students. But the Accessibility Inspector in Office can take you further. It points out these issues whilst you create content, so it's more efficient to resolve these issues before you upload the content to Blackboard. As a professional, you want your audience to focus on your content. And when content shows poor accessibility practice, it can make it more frustrating. For example, when text has too little contrast, you might be distracted trying to make out what's on screen and lose focus. Or if you open up a large document and you find you can't navigate through it using headings and you're in a rush, it's likely you'll be distracted by the problems the content is causing you, not the solutions you're expecting to find in that content. And even if your audience knows nothing about accessibility, if you follow good accessibility practice, it's more likely that you'll get the results you want. While we usually don't notice when something's good, we do notice when something isn't that good. So where is the Accessibility Inspector and how does it work? It appears as a button in Word, PowerPoint and Excel at the bottom left center of the screen. This is the Office programs. We'll talk about if you use Office in a web browser in a moment. It will either say Accessibility Investigate or Accessibility Good to Go. And you select the button to open it. Having selected the button, a panel appears on the right of the screen that lists any accessibility issues the inspector has found. In this case, there's some missing alternative text, and you might remember we covered writing alternative text in a session back in May. And a link to that session, by the way, is in the slide deck. So in the screenshot now, we have selected that error, and the inspector is giving us some choices and links to learn more. And in this example, I've selected Add a Description, and now I can enter my alternative text. So by alerting us to issues whilst we create a document, it makes it easy for us to resolve those issues right here and now. And once we've resolved all of the issues that the inspector has identified, the button changes to Accessibility Good to Go. So this means that we've resolved all of the issues that the inspector has identified. It doesn't mean our document is perfect, it just means we've resolved the issues that the computer was able to detect automatically. And we'll be covering some issues that the inspector can't find in this session and in future sessions. If you're using a PC that is managed by the university, the Accessibility Inspector should appear while you work. But it's possible that this isn't the case, or you might be using a personal or other non-university PC. So how do you turn this feature on? So in Windows, you would open up Word, PowerPoint or Excel, go to the File menu, select Options, and from the Ease of Access section, select Keep Accessibility Checker running while I work. You need to do this in each of Word, PowerPoint and Excel. If you're using a Mac, open one of PowerPoint, Word or Excel and open Preferences. Choose Ease of Access, and under Accessibility Checker, select Keep Accessibility Checker running while I work. So far we've talked about using the Office programs on your computer, but you can also use Office in a web browser. There isn't an Accessibility Inspector in browser-based Office, but you can check for accessibility issues. Open the Review tab, select Check Accessibility. Any accessibility issues it can detect will be shown on the right. And the view is filtered by issue and priority, so use the buttons to change the filters to view all of the identified issues in the document, select an issue to find out how to resolve it. So in today's session, we're going to look at using the Accessibility Inspector in Word, PowerPoint and Excel. Now the inspector can spot 16 different types of issues, but we're just going to look at 6 today. And we're going to start by diving into Word. So let's dip into the demonstration. So here I have a Word file. It's a document I threw together about superheroes. Down at the bottom here, I've got the Accessibility Inspector button that says Accessibility Investigate. So I'm going to select that button, and it opens up on the right, and it's found 2 issues, something to do with headings in both cases. I'm going to look at this one first, no headings in document. I'm going to select this title of the issue, and then I've got, it's in this document. What does that mean? So then I can select that. It says Review Document Navigation. So that's brought up the navigation pane. And by the way, you can also open this up, the navigation pane, by going to View and making sure that navigation pane is ticked. Probably some of you will be used to using this, and if you aren't, it's a really useful feature. It should list all of the headings in the document so you can skip through and find something, which is really useful for longer documents. You might be thinking, Matt, I can see the headings. They're there. Look. History of superheroes, 1900s, 1939, 1940s. So it's broken, right? Now, I've only made these look like headings by making the text larger and in a bold font. So you see I've got font size 20 in bold. But I haven't actually told the computer that these are headings. I've just used these graphical elements to make it look like a heading. The computer doesn't know. That can be really important. For example, a screen reader is a piece of assistive technology that reads out what's on screen. Many of those who use screen readers will navigate a page in a different way than you might be used to. One such method is to navigate through the headings of a document or page. On screen are 2 documents. The NVDA screen reader has been set up to show the headings in the document. And while the documents look the same, only one shows headings to navigate. This is because only one document has headings set up using heading styles. The other simply uses bold text and a large font to visually show headings. So a screen reader user can navigate quickly through the document with headings to find the content they want, but they have to listen through the whole document to find what they're interested in within the document if they don't have headings. So how do we actually add these headings? It's quite straightforward. We could select our first heading, and I can use the styles up here in Word. Say this is my first heading, heading level 1, the top heading. And then this is my next subheading. I'll make that heading 2. And you can see already the error has disappeared from the Accessibility Inspector, and I'm building up this hierarchy. Now, just to not make you watch me do the whole of this document, here's one that I prepared earlier. If I go to the View menu and open the navigation pane, you can see I've got all the headings. I can very quickly move through this document, and I've also got subheadings even below that. Now, when we're adding our headings, it's important that we don't skip a level. So here's a graphic example from The Big Hack, which is a website set up by the charity Scope. Here they demonstrate that we have a heading 1, and it's a bit like folders and subfolders. We've got heading 2, and then another heading 2, then below that heading 3. What's really important is that we don't go from, say, a heading 2 straight to heading 5. We have to make sure that we follow that sequence. Now you might be thinking, Matt, but there I can see it goes from a heading 4 to heading 2. That's okay, because that's within the hierarchical structure. I've gone to a certain subtopic, my heading 4, and now next is a kind of subheading from heading 1. So I've got that set up there. Now I know some of you are likely to say, I don't like these headings and how they look. Why is it blue? I don't want blue. It's very easy to change these. So say I actually want my heading 2 to look different. I can right click on heading 2, it's helpful to put the cursor kind of where you've got a heading to, otherwise it might skip to where you'd left the cursor. I can right click on that heading 2 and choose modify, and there I can change the font size, bold, italic or underline, and change the color. Maybe I want to adjust the color, and perhaps I want to increase the font by one set. Select OK, and now all of the heading 2s in this document now have the style that I wanted. Another great use for headings is if you've got a long document and you want to make a table of contents, you can make that table of contents automatically once you've got the heading set up. So that can be really super useful. Now let's look at the other issue that I had with that document. I have a table here that says no header row. And again, you might say, Matt, I can see the header row. Look, it's there at the top. But once again, I've made this heading look like a heading, but I haven't told the computer it's a heading. Now, why might that be important? I'm going to play you a short couple of clips. I mentioned in our last session on alt text about Blackboard and how students and staff can create alternative versions of documents, and one of those alternative versions is an audio version, which really suits you if you prefer to listen to content. Perhaps you do a lot of commuting, you want to make use of that time, or it might be that you really rely on having an audio version because of a visual impairment. Let's listen to how this table sounds once we've got Blackboard to create an audio version when we haven't added the headings. So this will take about 30 seconds.
Begin table with 3 columns and 3 rows. Row 1 of 3, column 1 of 3, superhero, column 2 of 3, skill, column 3 of 3, nemesis, row 2 of 3, column 1 of 3, Batman, column 2 of 3, crime solving, column 3 of 3, the Joker, row 3 of 3, column 1 of 3, Superman, column 2 of 3, flying, column 3 of 3, Lex Luthor.
So you may or may not have spotted that as we went through the document and we were listening to it, it was just telling us the content of each cell and its place within the table, like the column and the row. Imagine if this was a much more complex table, perhaps a table with lots of numbers. And when we were at row 3 of 3, column 3 of 3, it just told us Lex Luthor. Now if this was actually row 10 of 15, column 5 of 10, we might have forgotten what was column 3 about. So let's see what that sounds like, or hear what that sounds like when we fix the heading.
Begin table with 3 columns and 3 rows. Row 1 of 3, column 1 of 3, column heading, superhero, column 2 of 3, column heading, skill, column 3 of 3, column heading, nemesis, row 2 of 3, column 1 of 3 with column heading, superhero, Batman, column 2 of 3 with column heading, skill, crime solving, column 3 of 3 with column heading, nemesis, the Joker, row 3 of 3, column 1 of 3 with column heading, superhero, Superman, column 2 of 3 with column heading, skill, flying, column 3 of 3 with column heading, nemesis, Lex Luthor.
So hopefully you would have noticed there, it was saying for each cell, once we got into the kind of the data rows, it was reminding us what the column heading was. So when it said row 3 of 3, column 2 of 3 with column heading, skill, flying. So there we know this was that flying was the skill. So again, this is a very simple table just for demonstration purposes, but if we had a larger table, then being reminded what those headings were will be really important. It's hard enough listening to a large data table with the column headings, but because there's a lot to listen to and to keep track of in your mind. But if you're not being reminded of those column headings, then it can be really tough. So how do we fix that? So again, I can select the issue. It's saying it's an issue with the table. I can click on the button and use first row as header. Sounds good. I like that. Now the issue's gone. But there's actually one more thing that we need to do, and we're going to right click on that and choose properties, go to the row tab, and we're going to untick allow row to break across pages and tick repeat as header row at the top of each page. this has many benefits, but particularly if you had a printout and a table was going across multiple pages, then it will repeat the header row, so you don't have to keep referring back to what were these columns about. And also selecting these options is the key to making sure you get the best result in the Blackboard audio version. So now I'm going to go back to our slide deck, which I am at. Now, I went through that quite quickly about which buttons to tick here. So you've got that back in the slides. We've also got some helpful links which can tell you more about headings and table styles. And we could take a break for questions. So I'll hand over to Julia to go through anything that was in the chat.
No actual questions, Matt, but just an observation from Wendy Ann, which says you have to have a super memory if you're visually impaired. And I'll say yes, which is why we put headers there, just so that we help them out, because my memory would have forgotten by the time I got down to the fourth cell there. So
Definitely.
That's why. But I don't know whether there are any other questions on Word.
I see that with Christina's asked, doing the audio version, does it read the table and say superhero is Superman, skill is flying, rather than referencing the cell number? Might have been. Or shall we listen to it again with that?
Begin table with 3 columns and 3 rows. Row 1 of 3 column 1 of 3 column heading superhero. Column 2 of 3 column heading skill. Column 3 of 3 column heading nemesis. Row 2 of 3 column 1 of 3 with column heading superhero.
So hopefully you could see or hear that it was referring to the numbers of the columns and the rows, as well as giving that extra heading information. Does that answer your question, Christine?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, we'll move on and talk about PowerPoint. Okay, so let's have a look. We're going to do a demonstration, and I'm going to bring up a sample PowerPoint file. So this is a PowerPoint file I just knocked up. It's about making a cup of tea. Maybe you've got a cup of tea right now. And I've got a title. I've got some pictures, like a sequence of what I might do if I was going to make a cup of tea. Now, everyone has their own rituals, of course, but usually you might put the tea in the tea bag, get the kettle, get some water in it, boil the kettle, add the water, add the milk, and then drink your tea. So it looks pretty simple, right? Can't be much wrong with that. So I'm going to select the Accessibility Inspector, and I've got 2 issues to look at first. So let's have a look here. Now, first of all, saying there's some hard to read text contrast. And it's in the title, which is up here. Let's make a cup of tea. So what do we mean by contrast? I'm just going to go back to our main slide deck to explain that. So using sufficient contrast is important for many reasons, and you're likely to have encountered situational impairments like trying to use a screen in a bright light, or project a screen in a poorly lit room, or screen glare makes it hard to see what's on screen, or you're just working in a room with poor lighting. And when we have text or images with insufficient or low contrast, those situational impairments can make it even worse. I particularly remember sitting in a lecture theatre looking at a really important all-staff presentation where with a projector quality a bit like this, and the text was yellow text with a white background, and you just couldn't make out anything. Our ability to distinguish contrast also reduces as we age, and good contrast can also help those who are colorblind, have low vision, or other visual impairments. Now, we're going to cover this in much more detail in a future session, but I'm just going to give you a quick deep dive into color contrast. I'm sharing 9 boxes in rows of 3. Each box has a different colored background and white or black text. The top row is harder to read because the color of the text has low contrast to the background color. The bottom row is easier to read. The text has higher contrast with the background color. But what about that middle row? Some might find it easy to read, some might disagree. How do we know how much contrast is sufficient? Well, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which you might hear us shortening to WCAG, provide a calculation for assessing color contrast. The result is a number or a ratio with a number, and the higher the number, the better. So I've revealed the contrast ratios for these boxes. The top row are all low numbers, they're below 2 to 1, those would actually all fail. The bottom row are all high numbers, they're all over 7 to 1, those would all pass. They go well beyond the minimum level of contrast. That middle row, where some might say it's alright for me and some might say it's not so good for me, those would actually all fail, because we need to have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 to make sure that we're meeting best practice in accessibility. So again, we're going to do this in a future session, but just in case you're interested, just for images or graphical objects or user interface elements like this arrow here or this filled circle here, we need to have a contrast ratio of at least 3 to 1 from the color of the image to the background color. For text, we have a minimum of 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio, and there's also an enhanced level of 7 to 1. You can look these up online. You don't have to get a pen and paper out. You can just put in 2 color codes and get a result. My favorite site to do this is whocanuse.com. The Accessibility Inspector won't identify all contrast issues. It doesn't work on images like this flyer for a summer party, where I can tell you anything that involves yellow and white is not going to be good for contrast. It also won't detect contrast in shapes. All of these shapes have fill colors that don't have sufficient contrast. And if, like me, you like using design ideas, you want to watch out, because sometimes PowerPoint, depending on the template, will suggest colors which are not accessible, and it won't tell you that they're not accessible either, which is a bug I've reported to Microsoft. Keeping it simple, the main thing to remember is that lighter text on a darker background will be easier to read and should have sufficient contrast, and likewise darker text on a lighter background should be easier to read. So let's go back and look at how we're going to fix this issue. So again, I'm going to select the issue here. I can either change the font color or the fill color, so the text color or the background. So knowing that darker text is better with a lighter color background, I could change my text color to black, and you should see straight away that that issue has gone. Likewise, if I just do an undo, I could change the shape fill color to a darker color that will contrast well with white, and again, that's gone. So you don't really need to worry specifically about contrast ratios. Just remember, light text should have a darker background. Darker text should have a lighter background. But you can get into the minutiae, which we will do in a future session. Now I've got one more issue here, reading order. I'm going to play you again an audio clip demonstrating why reading order is important. So let's explain the reading order. So again, I've uploaded this slide to Blackboard and made an audio version. Let's listen to what's happening with it.
Title: Let's make a cup of tea. Begin heading level 1, let's make a cup of tea. Begin image with description, boil the kettle. Begin image with description, drink your lovely cup of tea. Begin image with description, put the tea bag into the mug. Begin image with description, pour water into the kettle. Begin image with description, pour boiling water from the kettle into the mug. Begin image with description, add a splash of milk to the mug.
If I were to follow those instructions, I wouldn't have a successful cup of tea. Which is obviously a bit of a disaster. So how can we fix that issue? Let's take a look. So if I go here, I've got check reading order, slide 1, and I've got my recommended action, verify object order. And of course I can always learn more, and I can find out information about this issue as well. So if you're like me, you probably build slides by ignoring the template and dropping in the images and word art and boxes and so on as you like. Now, ideally, we should just use the templates because the templates should have the reading order fixed, but often I might be just wanting to throw in some pictures and I might change my mind about how I'm going to add the content onto the slide. And the reading order, when you create a slide, will be the order in which you added the images to the slide. So here, I appreciate this might be a little bit small to see, but I can see picture 2 because I'd added all of the alternative text because I thought I was going to be good, and it's saying boil the kettle. And if I select that, I can see, well, that's actually my third image in the sequence. And I happen to know that I'm going first row and across and then second row and across. So to fix the reading order, I just need to move these items either by dragging and dropping or using the up and down arrows into the correct sequence. And I find it quite useful. If I select what I know is the first image, I can then move that up because I've got the title first, then I'm going to put the tea bag into the mug. Then my next one is pour water into the kettle. I won't make you watch me do all of this, but hopefully you get the idea. Let's see how that sounds when we fixed the issue.
Title, Let's Make a Cup of Tea. Begin heading level 1, Let's Make a Cup of Tea. Begin image with description, put the tea bag into the mug. Begin image with description, pour water into the kettle. Begin image with description, boil the kettle. Begin image with description, pour boiling water from the kettle into the mug. Begin image with description, add a splash of milk to the mug. Begin image with description, drink your lovely cup of tea.
Awesome, so that's resolved that issue. We've got lots of links to help you out if you want to learn more. If you're using our university brand, then we've got a helpful color matrix which will tell you which colors are accessible when you use them with each other. And if you're just looking for some ideas of some accessible color combinations you could use, we've also got a accessible color suggester where you can click on a randomize button and get a selection of different background text and graphic colors that you could use for your next infographic or presentation. So again, let's take a break and look for, I'll hand back to Julia to summarize any questions from the chat, and do put up your hand if you have a question.
We have no questions at the moment, so anybody out there want to ask a question, just unmute and ask.
I'm now going to hand over to Luke, who's going to show us Excel and Accessibility Inspector. So I'm going to stop sharing and Luke's going to take over and do his part next. Over to you.
So I'm going to run through very quickly two very common issues that we're faced in Microsoft Excel. One of these issues is unique to Excel, and the other one is found across all of the Microsoft Office applications, but it's really useful to know how we can fix this in Excel. So the first issue I'm actually going to demonstrate is alternative text onto graphs. So here on screen, I've opened an Excel file and I've got my graph on the screen. So this is the same method that you use in all of the different Office applications, and we can add alternative text to this graph. You can add alternative text to most non-text objects. And there's two ways you can go about doing this. You can right-click and come down to the Edit Alt Text, and this will add alt text. It will open the alt text pane on the right-hand side of your screen. Alternatively, like Matthew has shown, we can come to the Accessibility Inspector. So if I come down to the bottom toolbar, this will then open up a high-level view of all of the accessibility issues contained within this file, which is really, really useful. So again, I can then come over to the errors. I can select the missing alternative text error, and it will tell me exactly which chart it is. So it will tell me that this is chart 1. So if I'm ever not sure where I'm actually doing, where the alt text should be, I can click on the chart and I will have the chart down here, which is really easy to find. It will also tell me the sheet name as well. So if you've got a workbook with lots of different sheets, it should be easy to find your accessibility issues. So I can then click on this small drop down and I can add a description. Now, adding a description to charts is a bit of an art form, but Matthew has really well summarized in a previous session how this can be done. And basically it follows this format. If I close this down and then reopen the alternative text to this graph, so this graph has been remediated. It's got the title of the graph followed by all of the data points throughout. So I've got all of the scores across here and it follows it in a logical order. So this makes it really useful for your audience to interact with this graph, no matter if they have any impairments or barriers. One thing that I would like to make you aware of as well is using slices. So we can use slices to filter graphs really, really quickly. Doesn't actually change the alternative text. So it's really important that when you're adding your alternative text to graphs in Excel, is to actually remove any filters you've got applied to your data set. So this way you're providing an alternative description to your whole data. So you're not just providing it for a partial piece of data. The next accessibility issue that I'm going to show you is the exclusive use of color. So here I've got the raw data in a table with some formatting applied to this column. So these are all applied as numbers. So again, if I come down to the bottom left-hand corner to the accessibility inspector, I can see that here I've got the exclusive use of color. And what this means is that color is being used to format a change compared to the rest of the data. So in this instance, this 0.04 that I've highlighted on the screen is actually a negative number. But this can be really troublesome if we rely on color only to denote this. A really common practice is that people print out their workbooks and their worksheets, and they'll print them in black and white. So if I apply a color filter, you can see instantly how difficult it is to actually obtain that is a negative number. And this is really common, particularly in the workplace and in offices. So what we can do to make this a lot easier is we can add a minus sign to the prefix of this number. And to do this, we can either format the cell number in the accessibility inspector, or we can come up to the top toolbar and we can choose the correct option here. So again, it will highlight a sample, and you can see here that we've added this minus prefix to the number. So once I then press OK, you can see that has now been repaired. This is something that I've spoken to Microsoft with as well, is the color contrast that it selects for the red color isn't actually accessible. So once you've done that and you've added your minus affixation to it, I would then also change the color to a slightly darker red. This way it should be a lot easier for your audience to actually see that it's a different color. But typically I would avoid using red text because it can be problematic for those with varying degrees of color blindness and vision. So that was a quick demonstration of alternative text within graphs on Excel and read-only formatting for negative numbers. But it doesn't stop there. In Excel, similar to Microsoft Word, we have a styles gallery. Now, these styles galleries are very useful at formatting a combination of cells really quickly and to make your spreadsheet look appealing. And you can apply this by going to the Home tab and then using the drop-down menu on the Styles section. And it will provide all of these different sections over here: the good, bad, the neutral, data and model, and we've got our famous titles and headings. So we can apply these to a range of different cells. However, not all of these are accessible. These ones in particular are ones that I would strongly recommend you move away from. And this is purely because the text has a very low rating against the background, so it can be difficult for people to read. And as Matthew pointed out earlier, down here in accent 4 is that dreaded yellow background and white text, which makes it very difficult even for people with good vision to interpret. Conditional formatting is commonly used in Microsoft Excel, and the good news is that all of these are accessible. Although the yellow fill on a dark yellow background is only just above that 4.5 ratio that Matthew mentioned earlier. So what I would recommend is using the custom format, so you can format your own conditional formatting to have better contrast with the text. It should also be noted that this is color-only formatting, which can be problematic for those people who read and who don't see color. So we are going to explore in a future session how you can format your cells beyond using color-only formatting. And Matthew also showed us tables in Microsoft Word, and these are the table styles in Excel. So the reason why I've highlighted all of these is because I've done the hard work for you, and I've worked out which tables are accessible. So to do this, I had a quick look at the color combinations between the text and the header row, and then the text and the table body. and it works out around just shy of half of the table styles are accessible. But a good rule of thumb to go with is using those dark colours and light backgrounds, or vice versa. I've got a range of different links. There's also, I'd strongly recommend the Excel Bootcamp course on LinkedIn Learning. That is very useful. And I think Matthew has put it in the chat already with his recording on how to write alt text for images, charts, and graphs. And now I'll pass back to Julia to see if the audience has any questions.
Not so far, Luke. Nope, so I think we hand back to Matt.
Thanks to Luke especially for volunteering to take care of the Excel part of this presentation. Very noble effort. Thank you, Luke. Now, you might be asked to create a PDF. And PDFs can be useful as a simple way to share content, but they can be a challenge to make accessible. So we have a few tips. First, check whether PDF really is the right format. If your original file is Word, PowerPoint, or Excel, sharing the original file might be better, so that original format, rather than using a PDF. And that's especially the case if you're going to upload the file to Blackboard, because students can create a tagged PDF alternative format if they happen to prefer to use a PDF. And that's going to be better than you trying to make a good accessible PDF yourself. Now, if you're going to go ahead with a PDF, make sure as much as possible that you followed that accessibility good practice in your original files, and the Accessibility Inspector can help you with this, as we've hopefully shared today. It's important to set the title of your document, and we'll demonstrate this in a moment on the next slide. And finally, use Save as PDF rather than Print to PDF. When you save as PDF, that resulting file keeps that accessibility information like headings and so on. And if you print to PDF, that information is lost, making the PDF file much worse in terms of accessibility. So how do you set a title for a file in Word, PowerPoint, or Excel? You go to this Info menu, and then you enter the title according to your preference. Simple as that. So now we've reached our conclusion. Let's try to make this our new slogan. It's not good to go until the Accessibility Inspector says it's good to go. It might not be possible in all cases, but let's make this our intention so that we can be as accessible as possible so that everyone can benefit. We've also learned today that the Accessibility Inspector cannot tell you all accessibility issues, but using it regularly will raise your awareness of what to look out for and consider as you continue on your accessibility journey. In terms of next steps, try using the Accessibility Inspector and post your questions about it in the 365 community. We've added lots of links in the slide deck to help you. And as you're using that inspector, give us feedback on what you would like us to cover in a future session so we can prepare a deeper dive into the topics that matter most to you. And accessibility isn't only about making your content accessible for others. There are many accessibility tools and features that can make your life easier. For example, you can dictate documents and emails. You can use Immersive Reader to make content easier to read or have it read aloud to you. I use this feature often to help me to proofread documents. You could set your computer to use a light mode or a dark mode, depending on your preference or your environment, your lighting conditions. And usually everyone has a preference, and maybe some of you are like me. It's the first thing I change when I get a new device. You might have heard of blue light filters or night light settings. Now, some find that using these whatever time of day can help to reduce eye strain. And you can change the scale of how Windows presents content to make it larger if you wish. So we've got some links at the end here. There's an introductory course to digital accessibility on Blackboard, which has recently been extended to include lots of guidance specifically about accessibility in Office. And Microsoft has a brilliant short course on accessibility fundamentals, and there's a really lovely short course on LinkedIn Learning called Digital Accessibility for the Modern Workplace. It's less than an hour long and it's really approachable. I really recommend it. We mentioned that computers can't detect all accessibility issues, I strongly recommend the Dyslexia-Friendly Style Guide from the British Dyslexia Association. There's lots of simple and easy tips there that will help you to make your content more accessible. Here's a screenshot from the introductory course on Blackboard. The course is broken into two main parts. One section explains accessibility from the perspective of the lived experience of those with different types of impairment, and the other is a dedicated section to Office accessibility. And that's a great resource for dipping in and out of to remind yourself of things we've covered today and further ways that you can improve accessibility of the content you create in Office. We've also got more links here. For example, John Lightfoot, our colleague, has a great SharePoint site about creating accessible PDFs. Also, if you do use design ideas, check out my blog post on some of the unhelpful ways design ideas might exclude your audience and how to resolve those issues. If you're interested in like having your emails read aloud to you or changing colors in Windows and so on, I've got some links there. And if you use something that isn't Windows, the My Computer My Way site has lots more along these lines. So they cover Windows, Macs, iPhones, Android phones, and Chromebooks. And Julia has recently updated the 365 Community SharePoint site to include a dedicated 365 Accessibility Hub, where you can find out more about using the Microsoft 365 tools in an accessible way, and much more. Thank you for your participation and engagement in today's session, and we can use our remaining time to answer your questions and discuss anything we've covered today or anything else you'd like to talk about. Thanks very much. Over to you, Julia.
And we have a hand up as well from Christina Thompson. So, Christina, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, it was just a question going back to pictures. I've had a little look. Quite often I'm writing working instructions for Business World and the online store. And quite often imagery is very important. And I'm just struggling with how to put a suitable text really on images that would make sense, because these are often screenshots, and I'm a bit lost and happy to investigate a bit more really.
Yeah, we can definitely help you with that. I'm just going to bring up a slide from another presentation. Hopefully you can see I've got some. This is from another presentation which was for iSolutions. So really, in a way, you shouldn't need to worry about the alternative text for screenshots. The main point is don't use the screenshot as the only way of explaining something. And that'll be easier if I have this example. So this example, I've got some text instructions saying tick the boxes as shown here, and my alternative text is Blackboard discussion board options. Now, I could change my alternative text to say allow members to create new threads as ticked, allow file attachments as ticked, but a better way would be to mark the image as decorative and make sure that the text is such that I could follow the instructions without the images, and the images are just a nice extra to have to help those who can see them. But if I didn't have the images, I would still be able to follow the guidance. Now, it might not be that something is as straightforward in an application like Business World or something like that, which I have very little knowledge of. But if you can find a way to write the text that it's clear enough that you could follow the steps that you want to do to achieve a process or something without having to look at the picture, but still have the picture as an additional resource, that's what we tend to recommend. I don't know, Christina, if that is a very helpful answer for you.
Yeah, that is very helpful. It's obviously some images are quite complex, but yeah, putting a menu down of what you're basically looking at could well help. That it was just obviously that quite a lot of the time that inspectors come up with investigate, and then I look at it and thinking, oh God, what am I going to do about that one? But yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Glad we could help. And of course, if you do get any like interesting, unusual examples that are particularly challenging, then if you post them in the 365 community, I'm sure our community hive mind might be able to help to come up with some suggestions.
Yes, great, thank you.
I like that, our community hive mind. Right. Well, thanks again to Matt and Luke. Just to say that next week we're back on the Wednesday, I think it is, and it's looking at Outlook folders.